Well, today on the show, I'm going to ask you to place a value on how good you think Geno Smith is. But I'm going to do it in a different manner by presenting you with a hypothetical, a thought exercise, if you would. Who would you trade Geno Smith for out of all the quarterbacks in the NFL if you could, straight up? And to illustrate the idea, because I can't possibly get all 10,000 answers from you, I'm going to work through it myself and tell you who I would trade him for straight up. And I'll do it in the moment, live, as I record this, with no preconceived notions, other than obviously my own long-held biases and opinions. And in doing so, try to make a point that in some form or fashion I've been trying to make for nearly 25 years. I'll explain next on this edition of Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
I'm here. It's working on a couple of technical things. How are all of you? How are you enjoying the off season? We're into June now, and it's going to move quickly. As much as this is kind of the slow time of the year, and we have so many other things to do as the weather gets nicer and kids are out of school and all of that. And there isn't much going on the field in the NFL. That it actually goes pretty quickly now. Mandatory mini camp starts on the 11th. 3 sessions. The media is allowed into all 3 of those. It's my understanding. So we'll get a lot of information each day, and I'll do some check-ins and do some takeaway episodes, reacting to things that we're hearing, seeing, and things that are being written about coming out of those sessions. We'll get a lot more answers about who's healthy and where certain players are lining up and playing, and that'll be fun. And then once that's over, it's basically then 4 weeks until training camp starts, and that moves pretty quickly. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, become part of the community, hit that bell so you always get notification of future episodes, and I'll put all the information down in the description on different ways you can support the program and the channel. If you listen on audio and that's the way you prefer to get your podcasts, you can subscribe to Seahawks Forever on any podcast platform. But on Spotify, you can actually hear the episodes without any ads in them. It's a small monthly fee. That link will be down below. You can also hit the super thanks or buy me a coffee or a beer. Some exciting things coming up on the show over the next couple of months as we get, rolling into the season. So this is something that's been kicking around, as I teased in the intro, for over 2 decades. And the concept comes from this. We've had many, many, many discussions on this show and outside of it, on Twitter, if you follow me there, at Seahawks Forever, of course, of whether or not Geno Smith's a viable starting quarterback and a guy you can win with, and did they do the right thing by not more aggressively pursuing, trading up or finding a young quarterback? He's a very polarizing player, and most quarterbacks are. We had this discussion on Sunday with Bryce Coutts of the Hawks Zone Rundown podcast. And if you haven't checked out that episode, please do. I'll link it again down below. Very low viewership, surprisingly so, because, Bryce is great and what he and Ryan do on their podcast is fantastic. But also he runs a quarterback academy, has spent most of his life playing and coaching the quarterback position, runs a quarterback academy that he owns in British Columbia. And we got into some really cool discussions about what makes a good quarterback, and not just from a mental standpoint, but also physical and mechanics. And we went through and kind of applied some of those ideas to the NFL, who has the best mechanics in the NFL, some guys in Seahawks history who has some of the best qualities if we're trying to build the perfect Seahawks quarterback. So definitely check that out. But we touched on the idea that for some reason, and maybe it's just because the quarterback position is the focal point and everybody watches it on every play, and regardless of how extensive your football knowledge is or how extensive you think it is, that you think what goes into making a good quarterback. But the thing that gets frustrating sometimes for me, and I've talked to other people that do what I do as well, when talking about the position, is this lack of gray area and middle ground, where you're either an elite quarterback, a franchise quarterback, or you stink and you're garbage and you don't belong in the league. And I've had, if I had a dollar for every debate I've had about some quarterback, fill in the blanks, over the years of the Seahawks or, my WSU Cougs or any team you want to talk about, where, I'm trying to debate with someone that just isn't willing to look at the position with anything but blinders on, and is so set in their ways and their decisions about whether someone is good or not. And this goes all the way down, when we talk draft in March and April, people make up their minds about prospects. Don't touch this guy, he stinks, or this guy's a savior. There's no middle ground. Middle grounds win. There's a lot of middle ground quarterbacks in the NFL. Not everybody is Patrick Mahomes. But you don't have to be Patrick Mahomes to win a Super Bowl. Now, if I hear you chuckling out there, I'm probably not too far off, right? Because he does seem to win all the Super Bowls lately. But I think you understand my point, right? There are a lot of quarterbacks out there that many of you wouldn't consider elite that are getting paid right now. $40, $45 million deals, right? Daniel Jones, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins. I think those are guys that I would consider maybe not Jones. He still has a lot to prove, but that I would consider in that next tier. Where does Geno Smith rank in that? And when I get into debates about how good Geno is, it usually comes down to they'll handpick some statistics that they think shows that he's not a good quarterback. I can handpick some statistics that I think show that he is. And we don't gain any ground. Neither of us convinces the other person. And my point is that if there's an upgrade out there, if there's a path to getting a guy that you think can be closer to that elite level, because man, those are hard to find, but closer to it, right? Someone who is no doubt that the majority of the fan base would agree we got our guy. If you can get him, then get him. I've never said Geno Smith is the greatest or the savior. What I have said is I think he's really good, really talented. I think he's better, can be better than he's played the last couple of years because he hasn't gotten any favors in pass protection or play calling, personnel usage. In fact, here, while I'm thinking about this, let me go to a tweet this morning that I really liked. This was a stat passed along by Brian Nemhauser of Real Hawk Talk, and I bookmarked it. The Seahawks dropped 30 passes last season. Seahawks receiving crew pass catchers dropped 30 passes, ninth most in the NFL. It's not good. The offensive line gave up 229 pressures, sixth most in the NFL. It's not good. And yet Geno Smith still led the league in game-winning drives and finished with a higher passing rating than Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow. And then he says, watch out for these two in 2024. And it's a picture of Geno Smith next to Ryan Grubb. I do think the coaching staff in place, some of the upgrades on the offensive line, the weapons around him, I think there's more to be had from Geno Smith. So that's the angle I would come at it with. Other people might just say he doesn't process well enough. He spends too much time in the pocket. He doesn't get rid of the ball fast enough, whatever. Take your pick. You can do that with just about every quarterback in the league. And that kind of lends to my point. Well, what I meant by I've been making this argument for 25 years is, and Bryce and I touched on this a little bit the other day, is very, very similar to debates that were had all throughout the Matt Hasselbeck era, right? I kind of feel like there's some similarities there. Like for 10 years, I really liked Matt Hasselbeck. Autographed ball right there in the back. He was my favorite player during most of that time. Loved the way he played the game and always thought he was underrated, even for his skill, his arm strength, even. Bryce said, when we had that discussion, probably had the best mechanics of any quarterback in Seahawks history. But yet there was a large portion of the fan base that thought that Matt stunk. And the debate that I'm mostly talking about is, and if you're listening, Dad, I love you. But, and this isn't going to surprise him, he and I butted heads over Hasselbeck for 10 years. And he was always looking for the next best thing. And he always thought that it was on the roster. Seneca Wallace, right? He actually thought, do y'all remember the game that Mike Teal had? What was he, a 7th round pick out of Rutgers? He had a 4th quarter against the Raiders in a preseason game where he lit it up. Just top of my head, he was something like 11 out of 13 for 150 yards, a couple touchdowns in a quarter. Just looked great. And my dad was convinced in that moment that he should be the franchise quarterback. So that's what I mean. We've had this discussion before many, many, many times. And what I would always say to him then is, okay, how many quarterbacks in the NFL do you think are better than Matt Hasselbeck? And he would list a bunch of names. And they would all be names of really good quarterbacks who are not available. And I'd say, okay, Dad, how are we going to get one of those guys? We can't. So what are you going to do next? Well, many fans would then say, well, draft a guy. Just go get a young guy. Find your next franchise quarterback. Do whatever it takes. Mortgage your future. Move up in the draft. Have you checked the hit rate on first-round quarterbacks lately? It's not good. It's not good. Now, you might have looked at a class like this year, 6 in the first 12, a lot of promise there. And I like all 6 of these quarterbacks, and I look at them, and I don't see anyone who has obvious bust risk written all over him. Maybe Drake May. But I also don't really see someone who would have been worth mortgaging the future to move up and get, because that position's so volatile and because you just don't know. Based on history, 3 of these 6 are going to fail to meet expectations, if not 4. Now, I do think this group's going to be the exception to the rule. I think it's a very good group. But you get my point. Look at the 2021 draft. All those quarterbacks, and granted, there was only one taken in the first round, and Kenny Pickett, they've all been traded. And there are other drafts in recent history that we can look at the same way. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put up a list, right? We're going to go kind of low tech on this today. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And here, let me do this. Let me get down here so you can see it all. This is just, so I put it into 2 columns just to format it, make it easier for you to see. I just took last year's passer rating leaders, and I got down. There's some names on here that we're not even going to consider, but I wanted it, to be formatted right, and to just, put as many names on here as possible. Now, down at the bottom, this might be a separate discussion. I listed the 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round this year. You see them down here with the asterisks by them. Okay. These guys here: Williams, May, Daniels, McCarthy, Penix, Bo Nix. And I even included, the guys from last year, the young guys from last year that, when the Seahawks had the 5th pick and they scouted all these guys hard, and everybody thought we were going to be in on some of them. And so I put Bryce Young in there, even though he finished like 47th in passer rating. And I put Anthony Richardson. I put Will Levis. Okay. And so I'm just going to go through one by one and tell you who I would trade Geno Smith for if given the chance, straight up. Now, we're going to do this 2 ways. The first way is just strictly on talent alone. Forget about salary, cap hit, contract, age. Forget about that. Just how many, I think, just talent-wise, can we win? Will this person help us to win more right now than Geno? That's my criteria the first time through. Then I'll go through and add, okay, with contract, there's some other guys, and kind of make some notes there. And then we'll tally it up over here on the right in this gray box. How many, right? And that way we will essentially come up with a number. Is it 12, 14, 15? Rather than, trying to crunch a whole bunch of numbers, and, the number of different ways that we can analyze and rate and judge players these days grows by the minute with all the different stats. We're going to do it this way: by trade value, perceived trade value. Obviously, this is very, very subjective. Brock Purdy, number one. Nope. No. I don't think if you plug Brock Purdy into what the Seahawks are going to do this year, I don't think he gives you a better chance to win than Geno. I think he's a very, very skilled quarterback, and he fits perfectly in what San Francisco and Kyle Shanahan do. He's a perfect match there. I don't think he would be as much of a fit in a Ryan Grubb offense. Deeper shots down the field, middle of the field, tighter windows, pushing the ball downfield. I think Geno's more skilled in that area. Now, when we get to the discussion later about contract, obviously that's a factor. Dak Prescott, no. I've never been a big Dak Prescott fan. I think he was the first guy to kind of get grossly overpaid. I just don't see a special player in there. Flashes, sure, he'll have huge games. But if you've ever owned him in fantasy football, which I don't because of how I feel about him, it's a roller coaster. He might throw 4 touchdowns one week and then, put up a 3-point game the next week. I don't think you plug him into this offense and he makes them go any better than Geno Smith can. Kirk Cousins, no. I think it's close. I think this one's really close. I do. Maybe even, but I'm not trading him straight up. There's no reason to. I'm not doing it. Lamar Jackson, of course. And I've been a critic of Jackson's over the years. I thought his skills as a passer just didn't advance enough for my liking. But ever since Todd Monken got there, he's taken a step forward in that aspect. And he's a leader. He's an alpha. He's a dog. He can do it with his feet and his arm. He's a competitor. He lifts up the players around him. He takes a lot of heat for his performance in the playoffs last year, but man, I find it hard to believe that there's not a Super Bowl championship in that guy's future. And I'd be ridiculous if I didn't say that I would take Lamar Jackson straight up for Geno Smith. I would. Tua, hell no. I'd put him in the same category as Dak Prescott. I think maybe even Brock Purdy. I think he fits that offense really well. And he got through last year unscathed injury-wise. That still scares me a little bit. I kind of think Tua is one of those guys that everything has to be clicking. Everything has to be buttoned up tight and operating smoothly around him for him to really succeed. Now, you see some phenomenal throws on tape, some wow throws, but not more so than you do on Geno's tape. I'm not taking him. Geno's bigger, stronger arm downfield. Nope. CJ Stroud, of course. I mean, he's the guy that, man, how much of the Carolina Panthers going to look back and wish they had done something different? I mean, heads have already rolled there after 1 year because they made the wrong decision on quarterback there. Stroud special, very, very special. And what's impressive to me about it is just how calm and serene and zen he looks as he's going about doing his job. I think Houston's building something really special there. Again, this is just based on last year's passer rating. So Jake Browning ends up in the top 10 there. Nope. Russell Wilson. Nope. Not today. Jared Goff's very, very close as well. I think right there with Cousins. And oh man, this would be close. But I think they're even. And so again, you're going to have to motivate me. Like the exercise is, would I trade him straight up? And if I think he might just slightly be better, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going with continuity. That's a close one, but I'm sticking with Geno in that case. Derek Carr, no. Jordan Love, yes, absolutely. I was skeptical of Love. Didn't think his college tape was special. Didn't really even see a first-round quarterback there. Thought that was a little bit of a reach. But the Packers played this one perfectly. They saw something in him. They gave him time to develop, and they obviously executed that plan. By the time he got a shot to play, he was ready. And you saw the progression throughout the year. And by the end of the year, he might have been right up there with Stroud, like playing the best football in the NFL at the quarterback position. And I think just like Houston, I think Green Bay's building something really, really special there. Jordan Love's really, really impressive. And of course, you have to take his age into account. Yeah, I would do that. Baker Mayfield, no. Love me some Baker. But I also think we have Baker 2.0 on the roster already and Sam Howell. Like the doppelganger effect there is pretty remarkable for me. Just their how they are so similar physically, even, the way they throw the football, their play style. It's kind of cool. Justin Herbert, of course. I can't wait to see what Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman have in store for him, especially with some of the upgrades to the offensive line there. They still probably need to add a few more weapons. That'll be a focus moving forward, I'm sure. But I think, people have they forget about Herbert sometimes. I know he's been banged up a little bit the last couple of years, but because he's kind of stuck down there, they're the other LA team. I still slip up and call him San Diego half the time. Justin Herbert has a special arm, and I think he's wired right, and I think all the pieces are there. Of course, I would trade Geno for Justin Herbert. Mahomes, a no-brainer. We don't even need to talk about it, right? Matthew Stafford is a yes, an emphatic yes. I still think he gets overrated or underrated. I mean, I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's a Hall of Famer. I don't know about first ballot. Maybe I'd have to see the class, right? But it's just last year was just a reminder, I think, with how that team was counted out going into the season and some of the questions they had, even on offense, especially with Cooper Kupp starting the season injured, and all the questions on defense with so many undrafted guys and sort of no-name guys being plugged in there. And, they come out week one and he just shreds the Seahawks. And his ability to throw the ball down the seam into tight windows and anticipate is maybe the best in the NFL. He might be the best in the NFL right now at that. And it's impressive to see. And when he's clicking with that, especially with those receivers he has now, you think about a full season healthy with Kupp and Nakua, it's almost impossible to defend. Really, really tricky. Can't wait to see how Mike McDonald tries to approach that this year. Josh Allen, of course, not just, how big and physical he is, but I just love the way he plays the game. He sacrifices his body. Does he make a bonehead throw once in a while? Absolutely. But he's one of those guys that he usually bounces back from it and does something good. He's got some of that dog in him, for sure. Joe Burrow, of course. I really hope we see a completely healthy season out of him this year. I really, really would like to see that. He's just fun. He's fun to watch. I like watching him play football. He usually throws it to the right place, the right time, to the right guy with accuracy. Doesn't have a cannon, but it doesn't matter. You never question his arm strength because his anticipation, his ball placement, his processing, all of that is in order. Now we have some interesting ones coming up. Flacco, no. Kyler Murray, no. From the day he was drafted, I questioned Kyler Murray's championship ceiling. And ever since then, there's been questions about his leadership ability, right? And while last year he played well when he came back from his knee injury in the second half, and there weren't any on-field outbursts that I recall where he's screaming at his receiver, blaming an incompletion on him, I don't see a special player. I don't think he's wired for greatness. I just don't. And their decision when they had all these high draft picks the last 2 years to stick with him is ultimately going to determine if Jonathan Gannon succeeds long-term there or not. But, some people have said that they're scared of the Cardinals this year because the new GM, Monty Austinfort, has put together a couple of really dynamic drafts. Well, I don't know about dynamic. Very good, impressive drafts. The way he's manipulated the draft board, gained assets, and they filled a bunch of holes, and they had a ton of holes to fill. I look at their draft class this year. It's very, very good. There's a lot of guys that I like on that list, guys that I had mocked to the Seahawks many times. But I don't know that you have a lot of dynamic upside. That's why I hesitated to use that word earlier. I was a little quick on the trigger on that one. I wouldn't trade Geno Smith for him. I just wouldn't. because I question his ability to elevate guys and lead guys and consistently make big throws over and over again. We'll see it. We'll see the wow throws, and then we'll see him with plenty of time to throw on 3rd and 7, throw a ball at a guy's feet or sail it 5 feet over his head and just walk off the field like it didn't matter. His demeanor reminds me of Rick Myers. Remember Rick? He could throw a game-winning touchdown or a pick six to lose a game, and you could look at his face, and it was exactly the same, just like this, just blank. Yeah, some guys that were in the ratings but aren't part of the discussion: Tommy DeVito, Tyrod Taylor, of course not. Jalen Hurts. I'm going to say yes, but I hesitated, right? I'm really concerned with what we saw from him the last 7 games last year. And maybe, and that's why I'm gonna go with it, because of the talent is there, right? He can beat you with his feet. He can beat you with his arm. He's got the arm strength there. His ball placement isn't always perfect. He's got A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They bail him out sometimes. I just wonder if that offense, from a coaching standpoint and an organizational standpoint, was just dysfunctional last year. And I think we could see a big bounce back year where Jalen Hurts is in the MVP conversation. I think this is one of those names that if I said no, just to try and prove a point, y'all might just click out of the video and laugh me off the channel. But I do think that the upside is still there. And we haven't seen the best of Jalen Hurts yet. Seen flashes of it, but I think it can be put together in a fashion that would make him unquestionably one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. So have to say yes on him. Not going to on Trevor Lawrence. I think he's been overrated from the moment he stepped on the field in Jacksonville. I thought he was anointed too soon because of his freshman year at Clemson. And then people made up their minds about him and they weren't willing to consider the alternative. I think he's got a slow-ish delivery, a long delivery. I think he tends to throw the ball to the other team in some key spots. I think that team has been upgraded the last couple of years, and that they should have. I think he underperformed last year. I don't see a player with spark. I see what a term that I used on Sunday with Bryce. This is a term I learned from Tim Rosenbaugh when he was playing for the Phoenix Cardinals, and Tom Tupa was his backup. Called Tupa a Cadillac quarterback. And what he meant by that is everything looks pretty. It looks pretty. Everything looks right. He looks good getting off the bus. He looks good in drills. He looks good throwing the football. His mechanics are solid, but he doesn't have that moxie, doesn't have that it factor. This may be the name so far that a lot of you will jump into the comments and say, I don't know, man, this is crazy. But I'm not trading him straight up for Trevor Lawrence today. I'm just not. Again, it's close. It's close, but I'm not doing it. Nick Mullins, Andy Dalton, Jarrett Stidham. Now we get into some of these guys, but then there's young guys. There's guys like Anthony Richardson. Again, no. And I was as high on Richardson coming out in the draft last year as anyone. I was one of the guys, I think, early in the draft process, even during the college season, having debates with people who thought he was trash, 55% completions. He's not even a first round quarterback. And I was one of the ones saying, hey, he's going to go in the top half of the first round. And I said that because of things I had heard from people who'd studied him, but also just the traits and just knowing how NFL evaluators think. They think they can get the most out of a guy. That's why some of these players with traits get drafted so high and then don't make it because they don't have the other pieces. It's because teams think they can mold them with what they have to work with. So I'm not trading him for him today, straight up. Anyone else on this list that might be, nope. Justin Fields. Then you get down to Gardner Minshew, Deshaun Watson. Hell no. And then I'm not going to, for the sake of this part of the discussion, I'm not going to consider the 6th this year because we haven't seen him yet. We don't know. Although I answer it this way, I wasn't willing. I didn't want to see the Seahawks, given their current state, to give up any significant resources to move up into the draft to take any of these guys. And so that would just lend itself to my answer for this part of the exercise being no. So how many quarterbacks does that give us? Jackson, Stroud, Love, Herbert, Mahomes, Stafford, Allen, Burrow, Hurts. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And Geno is 10. So straight up, there are 9 guys that I would trade Geno for, which by argument would mean that I think he's about the 10th best quarterback in the NFL, which is interesting because that's kind of where I'd place him. I've had these discussions over the last couple of months that, I think he's top 10-ish. He's close to it. But then I would look at numbers and, you look at passer rating and QBR and yards, and he's more in the 15, 16, 17, 18 range. But by this hypothetical, it matches with kind of how I feel about Geno Smith. Now, you can have the argument, would I be happy if Geno Smith destroys his leg, right? And so disrespectful to chuckle there, but just the idea of it, right? Let's say he's hurt. He's not available this year, Then, some of those other names I thought were really close. Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Trevor Lawrence. Would I want to plug them in somehow, give up a future for that's a different discussion. Heck yeah. Again, I don't live with the mindset that you're either good or you're trash. There's a lot of other quarterbacks that I would consider tied with him. Let's go through those. So Cousins, let's put him in bold. No, let's keep it up. So I'd go Cousins. If you want to cut it really close, let's say guys that I think are equal, that I would trade Geno for if there's a little kicker. Now maybe you're talking Cousins. Again, I'm not touching Dak, and I think Brock's not a fit in the offense. So I'd go Cousins, Goff, Baker, Lawrence. So that'd be 4 more, which would put him at 13, right in the middle of the pack. And again, even if there's a couple guys you disagree with, you want to put Dak and Tua in there. Okay, now he's 15 out of 32. Finding good starting quarterbacks in the NFL is the hardest damn thing to do in sports. One of them, from an organizational standpoint. And so you're going to look at that and try to convince me that he stinks, or that Sam Howell should play instead of him right now, unquestioned, or that Drew Lock was better than him last year, which so many people tried to come at me and try to convince me of because they saw him play a couple of good halves. Now, again, before we wrap this up, let's kind of see what the number looks like if you start adding in context. Brock Purdy at that contract, yeah. Tua hasn't been paid yet. But you're going to have to pay him this year, so no. And that's still a no for me. Goff is still a no. Lawrence is going to be paid, right? You have to, if you traded for him straight up right now because he's younger, which would fit more into the second part of the discussion with adding some context, right? But you're going to have to pay him big money this coming season. I'm still out on Lawrence and Tua. Because I think even if Geno has a huge year this year and you end up extending him, I still don't think it's anywhere near what Lawrence and Tua are going to get. So I've added one name. It's Purdy. So that puts you at 10, which puts Geno at 11. I mean, that's where I'm at. I would encourage you all to do the same exercise and let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think and why. Like, I think Goff's a good argument. If you believe that you would trade Geno for Goff straight up, tell me why. Or did I miss on someone? Do you feel higher on Dak than I do? Kyler than I do? And I'll say this one more time before I sign off. I'm not saying I think Geno Smith is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or is going to be a future Hall of Famer, or is an all-pro, or a top 5 quarterback. I'm saying he's very, very good. I think he perfectly fits what Ryan Grubb wants to do on offense. He's here now. He works extremely hard. His work ethic's in the right place. He's a leader. His teammates love him. And he has a chip on his shoulder. And I think he's a very, very good quarterback in the NFL. And if you think you want to upgrade that position, you can't right now. So, A, if you don't like Geno, well, you're kind of stuck with him. And B, you probably should be a little more open-minded about it because I think he might change some of those minds this year. I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Thank you so much for watching, listening, supporting the channel. Lots of cool things in the pipeline. Hit all those notification bells so you get notification of future episodes. Got some cool things coming up this month. It might be a slow time of year, but I got a nice little fun list of some topics I think y'all are going to enjoy. So until next time, Seahawks at Seahawks Forever on Twitter. Forever and always, go Hawks.